My husband inherited $10 million, then left me for a younger woman, but karma had other plans, and now I'm finally living my best life. I never thought my life would turn out like this. My name's Clara, and this is my story. I was born to farmers, good people who taught me the value of hard work from the day I could walk. Our day started before dawn, tending to the animals and crops. Life was simple back then. I'd go to school, come home, and help around the farm. Weekends were for family time and catching up on chores. I didn't know any different, and I didn't want to. But things changed when I graduated high school. My parents, bless their hearts, wanted more for me than a life on the farm. "Clara, we've been talking," Dad said one evening as we sat around the dinner table. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." And just like that, my world expanded. I packed my bags and moved to the city, a place so different from everything I'd known that it might as well have been another planet. College was an experience. The classes were interesting enough, but it was the people that really opened my eyes. Kids from all walks of life, with dreams and ambitions I'd never even considered. And then there was Ethan. I met him in my second year. He was charming, confident, and so different from the farm boys back home. Ethan knew exactly what he wanted from life, or so I thought. "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," he'd say, lounging on the grass outside the library. "We should enjoy ourselves while we're young." I was smitten. Here was someone who saw life as an adventure, not just an endless series of chores. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. When I told my parents, they were cautious. They wanted to meet Ethan, to get to know the man who'd stolen their daughter's heart. "He seems nice enough," Dad said after Ethan's first visit to the farm, "but there's something, I don't know." "Just be careful, Clara," I brushed off his concerns. What did my old-fashioned father know about modern love? Ethan was perfect, and we were going to have a perfect life together. My parents, bless them, paid for our wedding and even bought us an apartment in the city. "We want you to have a good start," Mom said, her eyes misty. "Thanks, Mom, Dad," I said, hugging them tight. "I promise I'll make you proud." As Ethan and I stood at the altar exchanging vows and rings, I thought my life was set. I had a husband who loved me, a good job in the city, and a bright future ahead. The first couple of years of our marriage were, well, I thought they were good. Ethan and I both had jobs in the city, and we settled into a routine, but looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. "Clara, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Ethan would whine every time I suggested a visit. "It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something." I'd sigh and try to reason with him. "They're my family, Ethan, and they've done so much for us." "Fine," he'd grumble, "but I'm not shoveling any cow crap." I brushed it off as city boy squeamishness. After all, I'd grown up with those smells and chores, but now I wonder if I should have seen it as a red flag. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was over the moon, and my parents were ecstatic. "A grandchild!" Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Clara, we're so happy for you." Ethan's reaction was less enthusiastic. "A kid already? I guess that's okay." I chalked it up to nerves. Surely he'd warm up to the idea of being a father. My parents, bless their hearts, continued to support us. They bought us a car, paid for vacations. I was grateful, but Ethan seemed to take it all for granted. "Of course they're helping us," he'd say. That's what parents do. When our son Liam was born, I fell in love all over again. But Ethan, well, he tried. I'll give him that. But fatherhood didn't come naturally to him. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" He'd complain when Liam cried at night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." I'd bite my tongue and remind myself that we were both adjusting to parenthood. Life went on. We visited the farm when we could, though Ethan's reluctance grew with each trip. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd grouse. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I'd watch my dad and Ethan working together, well-stained and sweaty. Dad would be patient, explaining step by step while Ethan would grimace and fumble with the tools. Then tragedy struck. Within a year, both my parents passed away. I was devastated. "They're gone, Ethan," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't believe they're gone." He patted my back awkwardly. "It'll be okay. At least they left us the farm." His words jolted me. The farm, my family's legacy, and all Ethan could think about was what we'd inherited. In the midst of my grief, Ethan dropped a bombshell. "We should sell the farm," he said one night over dinner. "We could buy a big house in the city, live like kings." I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy, but I was tired, worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood. And wasn't a wife supposed to support her husband's decisions? "Okay," I said quietly, "if you think it's best." And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold off to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Ethan was like a kid in a candy store. "We're set for life, Clara," he crowed. "No more slaving away at work. We can do whatever we want." I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Ethan wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely, I'll give Ethan that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours. And for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Ethan, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. "That boss was a jerk," he'd say, or "they expected too much." "I'm not a slave, you know." I'd try to reason with him. "Ethan, we can't live off the farm money forever, or we need to think about our future." He'd wave me off. "Relax, Clara, we're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, our son Liam was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant owned by none other than Ethan's Uncle Henry. "Ethan," I called out, "did you see this article about your Uncle Henry?" Ethan's face darkened. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Ethan's version of it, how his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle, how Henry had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Ethan into the family business. "He never listened to what I wanted," Ethan had told me years ago. "It was always about what he thought was best, so I left, started my own life." Looking at Ethan now, lounging in his robe at 2:00 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace," I suggested gently. "It's been years, Ethan. People change." Ethan's reaction was explosive. "Make peace with that control freak? No way in hell, Clara. Drop it." I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Ethan was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Ethan on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. "I'm not interested in his life, and it does not concern me," he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. "Who was that, honey?" Ethan's face was a mask of indifference. "Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him." I stared at him, shocked. "Ethan, that's a terrible thing to say. He raised you." "Yeah, and made my life hell," he snapped. "I'm not going to see him." End of story. As I watched Ethan settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Ethan, I went to our bedroom and called Liam. "Hey, sweetie," I said when he picked up. "How would you feel about meeting your great-uncle?" Liam was surprised but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a haze of beeping machines and hushed voices, and there, in a bed surrounded by monitors, lay Ethan's Uncle Henry. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Ethan had described. When we entered and introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. "Clara, Liam," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long." Over the next hour, Henry told us his side of the story, how he'd taken Ethan in after his parents died and raised him as his own. "I love that boy," Henry said, his voice cracking. "I wanted him to have everything, to carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Ethan, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility," Henry continued. "Said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Henry's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. "Ethan demanded I sell the business," Henry said, shaking his head. "Wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car, said I owed him a carefree life." I glanced at Liam, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. "I told him that's not how life works," Henry went on. "That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business, but he just got angry. Said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life." As I sat there in Uncle Henry's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. I saw our life together in a new, harsh light. Ethan had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. "Life is for pleasure, Clara," he'd always say. "Why kill ourselves working?" I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Ethan hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Henry's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice weak. "I won't be able to leave anything to you or Liam or—" "It's okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "We don't need anything. I had plans," Henry continued, growing agitated. "A new project. It would have changed everything, but I ran out of time." Suddenly, Henry's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. "You need to leave," a nurse said, rushing in now. A few days later, the call came. Uncle Henry had passed away. When I told Ethan, his reaction made my blood run cold. Finally, he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Took the old bastard long enough." I stared at him, disgusted. "Ethan, he was your uncle. He raised you." He waved dismissively. Yeah. "So when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that?" In the end, Ethan didn't attend. Liam and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small, dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Henry proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home, gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. "The factory's got to be worth at least $10 million, I heard him saying on the phone when I got home. Can you believe it? I'm rich." I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then things got worse. "You know, Clara," Ethan said one evening, his eyes cold, "you're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. "You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better." Over the next few weeks, Ethan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours, reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. "Mind your own business," he'd sneer. You should be grateful I come home at all. As I lay awake one night, listening to Ethan stumble in at 3:00 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better, but more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything, about Ethan, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Ethan stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Ethan sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "None of your damn business, Clara. You should be grateful I come back at all." I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. "Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is?" He ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. "Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right?" The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. "What?" "Ethan, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty." His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. "Empty? You've got to be kidding me." He paced the room, muttering to himself, then turned back to me, his eyes cold. "Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here, done with you." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Liam walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Ethan's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. "Liam, my boy, just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me." He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Liam. "It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Henry's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway." Liam glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Ethan's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. "I want a divorce," he announced, his voice cold and flat. "I never loved you, Clara. I just tolerated you for your parents' money, but now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally. "I'm moving to Uncle Henry's house," Ethan continued, already pulling out a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage packed away in a suitcase and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Mom?" Liam's voice was soft, concerned. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Liam wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he murmured, holding me tight. "We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay." As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become, kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. And I realized something. "You're the best thing he ever did," I whispered to Liam. "The only good thing to come out of this marriage." Liam squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Ethan's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy, especially when Ethan seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Henry's mansion, now Ethan's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them, blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Ethan had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. "Meet my fiancé, Candy." Upgrade complete. The calls started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even Liam's old school teachers. All of them asking questions I didn't want to answer. "Clara, dear, is everything okay?" We saw Ethan's posts. "What's going on? Are you and Ethan really—" I couldn't take it anymore, the humiliation, the constant reminders of Ethan's betrayal. It was too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Ethan and asked to meet. After consulting with a lawyer, the day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Ethan swaggered in, candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something. Ethan whispered in her ear. Well, well, Ethan sneered, pulling out a chair for Candy. If it isn't the old ball and chain? Candy, honey, meet Clara, the starter wife. Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. I have the divorce papers here, I said, sliding them across the table. I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else. To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now. He scrawled his signature across the documents, then turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. Now I can finally be with someone I truly love, someone worthy of me. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Ethan's mocking laughter behind me, but I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. Local business tycoon empire crumbles. Nephew left with massive debt. It turned out that Uncle Henry had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Liam and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Ethan's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything, and still he was left, owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top, his young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Ethan wasn't the wealthy catch she thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Ethan. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Clara," he said, his voice cracked, "I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Ethan poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. "I was wrong, Clara," he said, his eyes pleading, "so wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me, the only one I've ever really loved." Then, to my utter disbelief, Ethan got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box. "Clara, please give me another chance. Marry me again. Together we can overcome anything." For a moment, I was speechless. Then I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown laughter, tears streaming down my face. Ethan's face fell. "What's so funny?" When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. "Oh, Ethan, did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough?" His expression darkened. "Now listen here," he snarled, jumping to his feet. "This is my house too. I have rights." I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his own signature. "No, Ethan, you don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine now. Get out, or I'll call the cops." For a moment, I thought he might try to argue further, but something in my expression must have told him I meant business. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called Liam and told him everything. My wonderful son was supportive as always. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said. I'm proud of you. Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the weeks that followed, I made some big decisions. The house, with all its memories, both good and bad, felt too big for just me. So I sold it, using the money to buy a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood I'd always loved. At 60, I'm finding that life is just beginning. I've started traveling, seeing all the places Ethan always promised we'd visit but never did. I've taken up painting, joined a book club, even tried my hand at salsa dancing. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Ethan around town. He looks older now, worn down by his mistakes and misfortunes. Life didn't turn out the way I expected, but you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm truly, completely, happily me.